My ex-boyfriend, Dylan, a master of weaponized incompetence and financial mooching, invited me, his former live-in ATM, to his wedding. The purpose? To rub his wealthy new fiancée, Bella, and his supposedly upgraded life in my face. He even scribbled a taunt on the invitation. Little did he know, I wasn't just going to show up. I was going to bring a +1 he'd never expect. Bella's high school sweetheart, Jake, the man she'd cheated on and dumped for Dylan. This isn't just a wedding revenge story. It's a journey of reclaiming my power after years of being undervalued and exploited. It's about recognizing the signs of narcissistic traits and gaslighting in a relationship, and the slow, painful process of boundary formation. Watch as a petty invitation backfires spectacularly, leading to a runaway bride, a humiliated groom, and the sweet, sweet taste of karma. From our early days at a Starbucks in Austin, Texas, to a disastrous wedding reception, this story is for anyone who's ever been made to feel small, only to find their strength in the most unexpected way. The aroma of freshly ground espresso and burnt sugar used to be a comfort. It was the scent of my college days, of saving every penny working part-time at a Starbucks in bustling Austin, Texas, dreaming of the day I'd finally move out of my parents' house. It was also the scent of how I met Dylan. He was 30 then, I was 22, a junior in college, and he was ostensibly paying off student loans from a vague business degree while charming customers and, apparently, me. Dylan's parents, as he often lamented with a theatrical sigh, were a financial train wreck, saddled with gambling debts and completely unable to offer him any support. Mine were, well, mine, loving, stable, and eager for me to fly the nest. We bonded initially over hushed discussions about family dysfunctions and dreams of a better future. It felt like genuine connection, a shared understanding. Looking back, I see the love bombing for what it was, a carefully curated vulnerability designed to draw me in. 2 years after I graduated, armed with a degree in marketing and a meticulously saved down payment, I finally moved into my own little one-bedroom apartment in the Zilker neighborhood. Dylan, however, was still struggling. His student loans were a persistent albatross, and moving out of his parents' cramped spare room seemed like a distant, impossible dream for him. My heart went out to him. So, I offered. "Move in with me, Dylan," I'd said, caught up in a wave of romantic altruism. "We can make it work." The making it work part quickly became lopsided because of his crippling debt, as he put it. He couldn't even cover half the rent. So I, in my infinite naivety and burgeoning codependency, agreed to cover 80% of the total. He'd pay the remaining 20%, he readily, almost too eagerly agreed. We split utilities equally, a small concession to fairness in an otherwise imbalanced financial arrangement. Our jobs were vastly different. His was hands-on, a vaguely defined role in logistics that required him to be on site for long, grueling hours. Or so he claimed. Mine was a corporate marketing gig with a wonderfully flexible schedule. My boss didn't care if I worked from the office or my couch, as long as my targets were met each month. This disparity, Dylan argued, naturally meant I should handle the household chores, the dishes, the laundry, especially his laundry, meticulously ironed for his demanding job, the cleaning, the cooking, it all fell to me. I didn't mind initially. I understood his job was tough. I was his partner, right? This is what partners did. The one singular chore I asked him to do was take out the trash. He was always the last one to eat, usually scarfing down the dinner I'd made while watching TV. It made sense. Yet Dylan would always forget. Every single morning I'd be the one lugging the overflowing bin to the curb. The weaponized incompetence was subtle at first, easy to dismiss. I remember one weekend I had to work, a rare occurrence, but a big campaign launch demanded it. I left on a Friday morning, the apartment tidy. I returned Sunday evening, exhausted, to what looked like a frat house after a bender. The kitchen counter was a sticky wasteland of overflowing dishes, empty pizza boxes, and discarded chocolate wrappers. Laundry, mostly his, was piled in a small mountain by the hamper. And the trash, still there, pungent and accusing. I was beyond pissed. I just wanted to collapse, but the sheer mess, the visual cacophony of his neglect, made it impossible to rest. So I spent the rest of that Sunday, well into the night, cleaning, scrubbing, sorting, sanitizing. I hoped, with a pathetic sort of desperation, that he'd notice, that he'd appreciate the effort, that he'd see how much I did. When Dylan finally sauntered in from whatever late shift he'd supposedly worked, he greeted me with a perfunctory hug, mumbled something about how much he'd missed me, and then immediately plopped down on the couch, flicking on the TV to watch some game. He didn't even glance at the gleaming counters, the freshly vacuumed floor, the now empty trash can, not a word. I burst into tears. I don't know if it was the exhaustion, the sleeplessness, or just the crushing weight of his utter lack of appreciation, but something inside me snapped. For the first time I saw, with a blinding, painful clarity, how little he actually thought of me, how little he valued my contributions, my time, my very presence beyond what I could do for him. He glanced over, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, his tone impatient. I just shook my head, pretending to be fine, suddenly too weary to even articulate the depth of my frustration. "Nothing, just tired. I'm going to bed." Before I left the room, I reminded him again to take out the trash. He nodded absently, his eyes already glued back to the screen. The next morning, the trash was still there. I lost it. When he came into the kitchen, looking for the breakfast I usually had ready, I told him, my voice shaking with suppressed rage, that if he wanted to eat, he could damn well cook it himself. He looked at me, genuinely surprised, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Wow, someone's being rude this morning." That's when I started yelling about how useless he was, how he contributed nothing to the household, how I was sick of being his maid, his cook, his laundromat. He blinked, a picture of wounded innocence, and told me not to be so overdramatic. The gaslighting was so blatant it almost took my breath away. My reaction to his neglect was the problem, not the neglect itself. I took a deep breath, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "Dylan," I asked, my voice now dangerously calm, "why can't you ever, just once, take out the trash?" "I forget," he said with a shrug, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "And what exactly do you do around here besides come home, sit in front of the TV with a beer, and wait for me to serve you?" He actually had the audacity to look offended. "I'm always tired after work. I deserve to relax." "And mine isn't," I countered, my voice rising again. "I come home after a full day, and I cook for both of us. I clean this entire apartment. I do your laundry. I iron your damn shirts for the week. And the only thing I ask of you is to take out the trash." He then tried to justify it, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. "I never asked you to do any of those things, and you should understand as my girlfriend that I need your help. My mother always did these things for my father. It's not a big deal. That did it." The comparison to his mother, the implication that this was my wifely duty even though we weren't married, that I was just supposed to cater to him like a 1950s housewife. It made my blood boil. I realized with a sickening lurch that despite all my hard work, all my financial contributions, paying 80% of the rent, I was letting him walk all over me. This wasn't a partnership. It was a parasitic relationship, and I was the unwilling host. I looked him straight in the eye. "Dylan," I said, my voice cold and clear, effective immediately, "I am no longer doing anything for you in this house. You cook your own food. You do your own laundry. You iron your own shirts. You take out your own garbage, and you clean up after yourself." His eyes widened, a protest already forming on his lips, but I held up a hand, silencing him, "And there's more. From next month you will pay 50% of the rent, or you can move out." This was it, my first real attempt at boundary formation, and it felt terrifyingly empowering. He was shocked, sputtering about where this was all coming from. I told him I was tired of working so hard for him, of feeling constantly unappreciated, of being taken for granted. He wanted to argue, to plead, to manipulate. I could see it in his eyes. But I just walked out, grabbing my bag for work. I was already running late. I kept my word. I only cleaned up after myself. I cooked only for myself. It was satisfying, in a grim sort of way, to watch him flounder. To see him frantically trying to find a clean shirt in the morning, to watch him attempt to iron, badly, to see the pile of his dirty dishes accumulate in the sink. He'd try to talk to me, to wheedle, to insist that I should be a good partner and take care of him. I stayed firm, unyielding. I stayed firm, unyielding. When it was time to pay rent, I transferred my 50% to our landlord, then emailed her to inform her that Dylan would be paying the remaining 50% directly. He came home that night furious, yelling that I knew he couldn't afford it, that I should pay the 80% like before. I calmly reminded him that he'd never once appreciated it when I did. I was done helping him out. He tried to make excuses, to bargain, but eventually, faced with the prospect of eviction, he somehow scraped together his share. Throughout all of this, not once did he apologize. Not once did he acknowledge my previous efforts or express any regret for his lack of appreciation. His narcissistic traits were on full display, a complete inability to see fault in himself, an expectation of entitlement, and a profound lack of empathy. Our fights escalated over the next few months. He blamed me for everything, constantly trying to gaslight me into reverting to my old ways, the compliant, accommodating girlfriend. Then, I got a promotion at work, a significant one with a hefty raise. One of our mutual friends, Sarah, who was also my coworker, must have mentioned it to him. That night, we had the worst fight of our relationship. Dylan came home drunk, stumbling into the bedroom where I was already asleep, and woke me up, yelling that he needed to talk to me right now, that it was something important. Groggy and annoyed, it was nearly 2 a.m., I sat up, bracing myself. That's when he drunkenly confessed he'd met someone at work. Bella. I knew her, vaguely. I'd seen her at one of his rare office parties he'd actually dragged me to. She was young, maybe 24, incredibly beautiful, and, as Dylan now slurred, the daughter of a wealthy industrialist. A real woman, not like you, he sneered, his words dripping with a sudden vicious contempt. I looked at him, at this pathetic, drunken shell of a man, and felt nothing. No jealousy, no sadness, just a profound, weary indifference. Our relationship had been dead for months. We were just roommates sharing a tense, unhappy space. Honestly, Dylan, I said, my voice calm, I don't care if you're seeing another woman. In fact, I'm happy for you. This was true. It was a relief. I suggest we break up amicably. You can move out as soon as possible. He stared at me, his brow furrowed, clearly expecting tears, a scene. You're not jealous of Bella? I smiled. A small, genuine smile. No, Dylan. I'm glad you found someone, because now I don't have to feel guilty about breaking up with you. His face contorted with rage. Is it because of your stupid promotion? He spat. You think you're too good for me now? My promotion has nothing to do with this, I said patiently. We haven't been compatible for months. We're roommates, Dylan, not romantic partners. I understand why you'd want to see someone else. I thought my calm acceptance would pacify him. Instead, he exploded. He started yelling about how he hated modern women like me, women who flaunted their careers. Bella, he declared, was a much better woman because all she wanted was to get married and have children. Bella, I knew, came from immense wealth. A career was probably an optional accessory for her, not a necessity like it was for me. I kept my cool, reminding him that every woman has different needs and aspirations. If you want a woman like Bella, Dylan, then you should be with her. There's no need to argue about this. Just move out as soon as you can. His eyes widened, a new, almost panicked look in them. But how can you afford the rent on your own? I explained calmly that with my raise I was more than capable of paying the entire rent myself. No roommates needed. Hearing this, he began to shout again, accusing me of showing off, of trying to humiliate him. He ranted about how Bella was richer than me, how her father had bought her a house. He sneered that, at the end of the day, men wanted a housewife, not a woman who could earn more than them. His fragile masculinity and deep-seated insecurities were on full, ugly display. At that point, I'd had enough. Shut up, Dylan, I said, my voice flat with exhaustion. I'm tired of arguing with you in the middle of the night. You have until the end of the month to move out. Until then, you can sleep on the couch. I could hear him still grumbling as I turned over and went back to sleep, a surprising sense of peace settling over me. Over the next week, Dylan slowly started to pack and move his things out. I felt a growing excitement at the prospect of having my apartment, my sanctuary, all to myself. On his last night, I came home from a late dinner with friends to find him and Bella sitting on my couch, in my apartment. I looked at him, my eyebrows raised. Dylan? It's my last night here, he said, a smug look on his face. I wanted to show Bella where I've been living. The audacity was breathtaking. To bring another woman, his affair partner, into my home without so much as a heads up, knowing I'd be back. I didn't want to be rude to Bella. This wasn't her fault, I reasoned. Oh, how wrong I was. So I politely greeted her. To my surprise, she looked me up and down with an expression of utter contempt, and didn't even bother to acknowledge my presence. The air crackled with unspoken hostility. I decided to ignore her, not to take it personally, and went to freshen up. Later, while I was in the kitchen making myself some pasta, I certainly wasn't cooking for them, Bella came in to get some water. She stood there, watching me with that same disdainful expression, making me feel incredibly awkward. "Is there something you wanted?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She just smirked and turned away. I decided to eat in my bedroom to avoid them. As I was about to come downstairs later to put my plate in the dishwasher, I overheard them talking in the living room. Bella was cooing about how lucky Dylan was to have upgraded himself after dating someone who looked like me. I froze, my heart clenching. Then I heard Dylan laugh, a hearty, agreeing laugh. Bella then asked him why he'd ever fallen in love with me in the first place, and Dylan's reply shattered the last vestiges of any lingering misplaced sentiment I might have had for him. He confessed, his voice laced with a smug amusement, that he had used me from the very beginning, because I was gullible enough to pay for our dates in college, to lend him money he never repaid. He even bragged about how I'd paid more than half the rent for the past couple of years, allowing him to save a ton of money. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd always suspected he'd taken advantage of my good nature, especially with the rent, but to know he'd been using me, consciously, callously, from the very start. It was a new level of betrayal. Bella and he then proceeded to dissect our relationship, making fun of me in every conceivable way. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and shameful. I felt utterly humiliated. But I refused to let them see me cry. I quietly retreated upstairs, crawled into bed, and spent the rest of the night crying silently into my pillow. The next morning when I woke up, they were gone. Dylan had taken the last of his things. He was officially out of my life. And as I walked around my quiet, empty apartment, a profound sense of lightness, of freedom, washed over me. I actually cried tears of joy, then danced around the living room like a lunatic. I spent the rest of the day deep cleaning, purging every last trace of him, every reminder of his presence. For the next few weeks I reveled in living alone. I stopped caring what Dylan and Bella had said about me. All was going well. Until 2 months later, Sarah, our mutual friend and my coworker, informed me that Dylan and Bella were getting married. It seemed sudden, almost rushed. Sarah showed me their engagement pictures on Instagram. They looked sickeningly happy. A pang of sadness hit me, not for the loss of Dylan, but for the years I'd wasted on him, the way he'd used me. But I also knew, with absolute certainty, that I would never have been truly happy with him. So in a way, I was pleased he'd found someone who could, apparently, make him happy. That same evening I checked my mailbox, and there it was, an unexpected wedding invitation. My eyes widened in shock. It was from Dylan and Bella. My first thought was that it was a mistake, or perhaps just a courtesy invitation. Then I opened it. In the corner, Dylan had scribbled a note. "I want you to attend my wedding so you can see the grand life I'm going to have with Bella." It slowly sunk in. He had invited me only to flaunt his new life, his rich partner, his perceived triumph. All the years of anger, frustration, and humiliation I had pent up inside me began to boil. And in that moment, a plan, a beautifully petty, exquisitely satisfying plan, began to form in my mind. I received yes, with a +1. I was determined to make Dylan Thorne regret ever sending me that invitation. My first step was Bella's social media. I scrolled through every picture, every post, and then, jackpot, just 6 months ago, Bella had broken up with her long-term ex-boyfriend Jake. Their pictures dated back to high school. They'd clearly been together for a very long time. This was the leverage I needed. Finding Jake, Bella's recently discarded ex-boyfriend, felt like striking gold. His Instagram profile, linked through some of Bella's older tagged photos from their high school days in affluent Westlake Hills, painted a picture of a seemingly sweet, devoted guy who had clearly been head over heels for her. My heart actually ached a little for him, recognizing the telltale signs of a man blindsided by a breakup. I sent him a friend request from my real profile, no more hiding, and to my surprise he accepted within the hour. I crafted my message carefully, introducing myself as Dylan's ex, the one Bella was now marrying. I was upfront about my intentions. Dylan had invited me to their wedding with the clear, malicious intent of showing off, and I was looking to bring a +1 who might recalibrate his smugness. Jake seemed intrigued, a little cautious but definitely curious. Why was I reaching out to him? Over the next few weeks, through a series of surprisingly candid messages and a couple of discreet coffee meetups at a neutral spot in South Austin, we exchanged war stories. Jake, it turned out, was still reeling from his breakup with Bella. She had, he confessed, cheated on him multiple times throughout their long relationship, with her latest affair being Dylan. This was news to me. Undenied. I'd had no idea their relationship had overlapped with ours. Bella, Jake explained with a sigh, always had a thing for older, seemingly more established men, a way to perhaps feel more adult or secure, despite her own family's immense wealth. He wasn't entirely surprised when she'd announced she was in love with Dylan, even while she was still technically with Jake. Their breakup had been messy, acrimonious. He'd blocked her on everything, despite her pleas for them to remain friends, a classic manipulator's tactic to keep a door open. Listening to him talk about Bella, the pain still evident in his voice, it was clear he was still deeply in love with her, or at least with the idea of the girl he thought she was. I, in turn, poured out my own heart, describing the years of Dylan's financial and emotional leeching, his weaponized incompetence, his gaslighting, and the final, humiliating conversation I'd overheard between him and Bella, where they'd mocked me relentlessly. Jake was genuinely shocked, his eyes widening at the callousness of Dylan's behavior, the cruelty of their words. He hadn't realized Dylan was that much of a user. After hearing everything, after understanding the depth of Dylan's deliberate attempt to humiliate me, Jake finally agreed to be my +1. A thrill, sharp and electric, shot through me. The thought of the look on Dylan's and Bella's faces when they saw Jake and me walk into their wedding together. It was a deliciously petty fantasy I couldn't wait to make a reality. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about a shared, unspoken understanding between two people who had been wronged by the same toxic duo. The day of the wedding arrived, a glorious, sun-drenched Texas afternoon. The venue was an opulent estate in the hill country, dripping with ostentatious floral arrangements, and an army of uniformed staff, all undoubtedly funded by Bella's industrialist father. As Jake and I walked in, me in a new emerald green dress that I knew made me look damn good, Dylan's eyes, as expected, practically bulged out of his head. He was standing near the entrance, greeting guests, his face a mask of smug triumph. That mask shattered the moment he saw Jake. He must have recognized him instantly as Bella's ex. His jaw literally dropped. We ignored his sputtering, thunderstruck expression and, with a polite nod, pretended to search for our designated seat among the rows of white chairs set up for the outdoor ceremony. Dylan, his face now a mottled shade of puce, hurried over to me, hissing under his breath, "What the hell is he doing here? Why did you bring Bella's ex to our wedding?" I just smiled sweetly. "He's my +1, Dylan." I knew he couldn't make a scene, not with hundreds of guests milling about. He had to begrudgingly walk back to his spot at the front, shooting daggers at me over his shoulder. When it was time for the bride's entrance, everyone stood. Bella looked stunning, of course, in a cloud of white lace and tulle, gliding down the aisle on her father's arm. The ceremony itself went smoothly, a saccharine display of rehearsed vows and forced smiles, at least from Dylan's side, whenever he dared to glance my way. The real fun began at the reception. Bella, having changed into a slinky, equally expensive evening gown, was making her rounds, air-kissing guests and basking in the attention. She hadn't noticed Jake or me yet. Then, as she approached our table, she saw him. She froze mid-sentence, her champagne flute tilting precariously. Her eyes darted from Jake to me, then back to Jake, her perfectly made-up face a canvas of confusion, then dawning horror, then pure, unadulterated rage. The narcissistic injury was palpable. Her perfect day was being tainted. "Jake?" she finally managed, her voice a strained whisper. What are you doing here?" "With her." She gestured towards me with a contemptuous flick of her wrist. I smiled again, my most innocent beatific smile. "I invited him, Bella, as my guest. We're here to show our support for your beautiful marriage." She looked enraged, ready to explode. Jake, to his credit, remained calm. "Bella," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "can we talk? Privately?" He didn't want her to cause a scene, and she, after a moment of visible struggle, nodded curtly, throwing me one last venomous glare before they walked off towards a secluded patio. I turned to watch Dylan, who had been observing our entire interaction with hawk-like intensity from across the room. He looked like he was about to have an aneurysm, his face a mask of impotent fury. But he was trapped, forced to sit there and pretend everything was perfectly normal. The party continued, the band played, guests laughed and drank, oblivious to the drama unfolding. But an hour passed, then another, and the bride was still nowhere to be found. A nervous whisper began to ripple through the guests. Bella's father started to look genuinely concerned. He dispatched a bridesmaid to find her. A few minutes later, the bridesmaid came running back into the reception hall, her face pale, clutching a piece of paper. She announced, her voice trembling in front of everyone, that Bella had run away with her ex-boyfriend, Jake. She then proceeded to read the note Bella had left. Seeing Jake again made me realize my lingering feelings. Marrying Dylan was a huge mistake. I'm sorry. B. The revelation stunned the guests into a shocked silence. Dylan stood there, center stage, humiliated, exposed, his carefully constructed triumph crumbling into dust around him. I admit, quite shocked myself. While I had brought Jake to piss Dylan off, to inject a little chaos into his perfect day, I had never, in my wildest dreams, imagined this outcome. Dylan looked like he was ready to tear someone's head off. Bella's parents, mortified, politely requested everyone to leave, profusely apologizing for the disastrous turn of events. I watched as Dylan, once so proud and boastful, stood alone, completely taken aback by Bella's decision, his grand life a smoking ruin. I did feel a tiny twinge of guilt, a fleeting thought that perhaps I'd gone too far. But then I remembered his taunting note, his years of using me, the humiliation he'd intended for me. And that twinge of guilt, it vanished, replaced by a deep, satisfying sense of karma. The event meant to showcase his triumph over me had become the stage for his spectacular downfall. My petty revenge had yielded an outcome far grander than I could have ever orchestrated. The online reactions to my story were, as expected, mixed. Many applauded my pettiness, agreeing Dylan deserved it. Some thought I'd gone too far, that ruining a wedding was a step beyond. I needed to clarify, it was never my intention to break up their wedding. I had no idea what Bella and Jake would talk about, or that Bella would make such a drastic decision so quickly. My sole aim was to make Dylan uncomfortable, to wipe that smug, condescending smirk off his face. Bella choosing to leave her own wedding was entirely her decision, a consequence of her own unresolved feelings and, perhaps, her realization of the mistake she was making. I had nothing to do with that part. I did text Jake, asking him what on earth had happened in their private conversation. I was eager for his reply. Jake finally reached out a few days later with a long, detailed text. He was incredibly grateful I'd brought him to the wedding. He explained that he and Bella had indeed eloped, currently on the honeymoon she was supposed to be on with Dylan, staying at a luxurious resort in Maui, again, undoubtedly on her father's dime. They had apparently talked to her parents, who, after their initial shock and anger, were surprisingly supportive, or at least resigned to the situation. Jake said he would meet with me in person soon to clarify everything. Meanwhile, Dylan had been trying to reach me non-stop, calls, voicemails, nasty text messages blaming me for the end of his marriage. I never replied, never engaged. I knew I had nothing to do with Bella and Jake running away together. His attempts to gaslight me into feeling responsible were pathetic and predictable. Then, one Saturday, knowing I'd be home, Dylan showed up at my doorstep, pounding on the door, yelling. I refused to open it, telling him through the closed door to leave. He kept yelling that he wasn't leaving until he talked to me. Finally, I opened the door a crack. "You're not allowed in my house, Dylan," I said firmly. "Say what you need to say from out there." He launched into a furious tirade, blaming me for ruining his life. He'd already given notice at his job, he shrieked, thinking he'd never have to work again after marrying rich Bella. He angrily demanded to know why I'd brought Jake to their wedding. That's when I decided to drop my own bomb. "Because I heard everything that night, Dylan," I said, my voice cold and even. "The night you and Bella were on my couch making fun of me. I heard you admit you used me for years, to cover your rent, to pay for our dates. I did all those things because I loved you. You clearly had no respect for me then, and you have no right to yell at me now for something Bella chose to do." His eyes widened in shock. He started to yell back, claiming it wasn't his fault I was so naive, that I couldn't see how he was using me, that I shouldn't punish him for the past. He ranted about how Bella was supposed to change his life, how he could have had everything. His words were so despicable, so utterly self-absorbed, that I simply told him to leave my property, or I would call the police. He scoffed, saying I wouldn't dare. I whipped out my phone and started to dial 911 right in front of his face. He immediately took a few steps back, his bravado deflating, and muttered something about me overreacting before finally leaving. I shut the door, my heart pounding, but a sense of grim satisfaction settled over me. That, I promised myself, would be the last time I ever saw Dylan Thorne. I blocked him from everywhere, informed my family about the incident, they were appalled by his behavior, and made plans to change my locks and install a security camera. My journey of boundary formation was taking a very literal turn. A month after the wedding that wasn't, Jake invited me to lunch. He said he was ready to talk. When I arrived at a quiet bistro in South Congress, I was surprised to see Bella sitting next to him. I braced myself for another confrontation, but to my astonishment, when Bella saw me, she smiled, a polite, almost warm smile, and greeted me. Jake assured me she was there to apologize, and she did. Bella profusely, genuinely, apologized for how she had spoken to me, for her contemptuous behavior at my apartment. Then, she told me her side of the story with Dylan. He had pursued her relentlessly at work, always being charming, attentive, especially when she and Jake were going through a rough patch. Dylan would constantly complain about me, about how unhappy he was, how he wished he had a better-looking, more sophisticated girlfriend like Bella. She'd sympathized, felt flattered by his compliments. After one particularly bad fight with Jake, she'd gotten drunk and hooked up with Dylan once. Guilt-ridden, and with Dylan constantly messaging her about how perfect they'd be together, how Jake wasn't good enough for her, she'd eventually broken up with Jake. She admitted she'd thought she could be happy with Dylan, despite their age difference and her family's initial reservations. Bella then explained that when she saw me at the wedding, looking so independent and confident, she'd felt a pang of insecurity, of jealousy, realizing I didn't need a man to take care of me in the way she, despite her wealth, had always assumed she did. She apologized again for hurting my feelings. I listened, and I understood, or at least I could see her perspective. I told her about my own journey, how hard I'd worked to get where I was. Then I asked her about what happened at the wedding. She confessed that seeing Jake again, looking at his face, she'd realized with a sickening clarity how much she was still in love with him, and how she'd never felt that way about Dylan. Jake confirmed that when they'd spoken privately, they'd both admitted their feelings, their regrets. And so, they decided impulsively to run away together. Bella had left the note, and they'd been together, and very much in love, ever since. Her parents, though initially furious, had eventually come around and were now supportive. She was planning to file for an annulment from Dylan very soon. Hearing all this, though it didn't entirely sit right with me, the impulsiveness, the hurt caused to so many, I was satisfied. At least two people were happy after the disastrous events. Bella and Jake looked genuinely happy together. We finished our lunch, talked a bit more, and then eventually left. I haven't spoken to either of them much since that day, nor do I particularly want to be a part of their ongoing drama. I'm focusing on myself, on my career. I don't know what will happen with Dylan. Hopefully he'll learn from his mistakes, learn that chasing partners for money and using people for convenience is a hollow, ultimately self-destructive path. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson about my own worth, about recognizing toxic patterns, and about the quiet power of well-placed, exquisitely petty revenge. My ex invited me to his wedding to witness his triumph. Instead, he and everyone else witnessed his spectacular self-inflicted downfall. And that, I have to admit, feels like a pretty grand life for me. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch!